I'm giving a lecture to physicians and other healthcare providers for continuing medical education the end of this May 2015. And it's supposed to be 45 minutes, but I feel 45 minutes to talk about a plant-based diet, the material is so enormous that I think you could skip a lot of important stuff. So I decided to post this lecture and its contents on this website for a secondary reference. Definitely, one-size-fits-all diet does not exist. There has to be tweaks amongst people. One man's food can be another man's poison for sure. And we've seen that with dairy. A lot of people have a sensitivity to dairy and do not know it. Gluten can be another example. There are different metabolic rates for people. Cholesterol receptors are different for people. Some people have excellent cholesterol receptors. Most people do not. And this is why it's important when you learn and read about dietary changes. It's important to work with your healthcare provider, particularly somebody who knows nutrition and especially plant-based nutrition to help you along your way. Because if you might be on medications and suddenly you're on this super healthy diet, the medications might make you feel sick because you're getting better and you don't need them. I want to compare and contrast these two eating styles because they seem to be saying very different things. And the first eating style is one I think scientific data favors as the basic diet for human populations. And that is the whole food, plant-based, carbohydrate-rich, low-fat diet versus the high animal protein, low carbohydrate diet. And there's a lot of information on the internet, and it can be paralyzing for patients and healthcare providers. But for me, these three questions really help me understand how the whole food, plant-based diet, carbohydrate-rich diet really makes a lot of sense. And by asking these three questions, how did the healthiest, longest-lived populations on the face of the earth eat? And how did their health change when they changed their diet? And lastly, how does a particular eating style impact our environment and what resources we leave future generations? This is an example of a plant-based diet. It is very carbohydrate-rich, non-processed, and it is whole food. And this is by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM.org. And they're out of Washington, D.C. They collaborate with George Washington University to have yearly nutrition seminars for physicians and other healthcare providers. And it's fabulous. I've attended them, and food is excellent and learn a lot. But as you can see, there's a glass of water on this plate. There's no milk. This diet is composed of grains like quinoa, millet, barley, oats, rice, whole grains, vegetables, even starchy vegetables, legumes like lentils and beans, and then the fruits. So it's very, very carbohydrate rich. What these plant-based diets have is fiber. So fiber, you do not get fiber in your animal products, and by animal products I'm including dairy, eggs, poultry, fish, and red meat. So these food groups do have fiber. They're rich in carbohydrates, teeming with vitamins, and they're the ones that have the phytochemicals. There's no cholesterol on this plate. That comes from the animal products. And there's no saturated fat, with the exception sometimes coconut and palm can have saturated fat, but that really comes from animal products. So this is the diet that people often think of in the office when they think, I have to be healthy and I have to reverse my diabetes. And so this is a diet that is high in animal proteins. Now, animal products do not have fiber. Animal products do not have phytochemicals. They are much lower in vitamin content. Of course, if you're going to eat this plate 100%, B12 would be required. And so the cholesterol comes from the animal products and the saturated fat. So I'm not criticizing this book. I have not read this book. I'm just using the picture as an example. And so this looks on the surface as a very plant-based diet because 75% of the plate is filled with vegetables. However, calorically, it's probably around 75% animal product, And so it is very low on fiber. And so those yellow things might be sweet potato, but let's say they're carrots, because that would be a very low starchy diet. And I'm here to talk about how this is not the optimal way to eat. But a lot of patients are under the impression that saying, well, doctor, I'm eating eggs with spinach in the morning and tuna fish salad for lunch, yogurt and cheese for a snack, chicken and broccoli for dinner, and I'm really avoiding those carbs. They believe that to be an optimal thing. And certainly, people can feel better eating this way compared to the standard American diet, the SAD diet, which is, the cheeseburgers, the milkshakes, and, mac and cheese and all that other stuff. But on a long-term basis, a lot of people come back saying that they're constipated on this type of diet, this high animal protein, low carb diet, that really need these carbohydrates. And I'm not talking about corn syrup and those junk food cereals. This diet is expensive. It's made artificially cheap because of our taxes going to subsidize big agribusiness. I kind of look at it as corporate welfare. And this diet is certainly not the one that's going to make runners run as fast as this plate. It's this diet, this high animal protein diet, is not eco-friendly. And it's not associated with the populations that enjoyed the highest, healthiest longevity. And it is full of more chemical pesticides and pollutants because of biomagnification. And it makes sense. I mean, water might have some arsenic or mercury, and maybe the seaweed has a little more. But we know that the vegetarian fish will soak it up and concentrate it, and the carnivorous fish will really biomagnify it, and it will be high levels of these toxins. I'd rather have, for the most part, people say, I'm eating large bowls of oatmeal with fruits, large bowls of, rice with a bean chili, pasta with vegetables, and minestrone soup, and salad, and fruit. And if I'm eating this way 100%, I'm taking a B12 tablet every day. These diets are actually inexpensive. This is the food for runners, and gladiators apparently were vegan. And this is the food of people who are thin. It is eco-friendly, and it's associated with longevity. It's backed by science as a lifelong eating style, and it's much lower in those chemical pollutants, those pesticides. So an example of that, this study was published in 2001, as you can see, and they studied levels of dioxin, dibenzofurans, and PCBs. So these are highly carcinogenic, especially dioxin, and they can be endocrine disruptors. As you can see, the vegan diet, the second bar to the right, the simulated vegan plate, had the lowest amount of toxicities. Freshwater fish, even organic, are teeming with pollutants, or arsenic and stuff. Human breast milk, for those who are not eating clean and plant-based, their dioxin levels and other, organic chlorines tended to be very high. So the take-home point is breast milk is extremely important, but it's very important to eat clean and plant-based when you're breastfeeding. As you can see, the EPA, this study shows that beef ingestion, as well as dairy, have the highest levels of dioxin, whereas water is negligible. So yes, everything is polluted, but higher up on the food chain is where we've got to really be careful. This is an interesting study, British Medical Journal published 2010, May. They took patients who adopted, one arm of the study showed patients who adopted a vegan eating style for several weeks compared to the omnivorous group, had the lowest plasma organic chlorines, these highly carcinogenic pollutants. So, for the reasons that we're going to go into, I don't want my patients to say, I'm cutting out those carbs. I'd rather have them say, I avoid the refined carbohydrates and eat lots and lots of fiber-rich carbohydrates. I don't want patients to say, I'm eating lots of lean proteins like fish and chicken. I'd rather them say, I have dramatically cut back or eliminated animal products altogether, like dairy, eggs, poultry, fish, and red meat. I don't want my patients to say, I cook with a lot of olive oil and coconut oil. With the exception of if you're like a marathon runner and you're really thin, I'm going to really emphasize calorically dense foods. And so if you look at some of these vegan marathon runners, they're eating lots of nuts and avocado, and they're eating oil, putting, oils in their, foods and everything like that. So that's where some fine tuning is required. But for the most part, I'd rather patients avoid oils and rely on the fats that are already in the food. And so the diets that we're going to study about, this plant-based diet that's high carb, is the ones that have been studied are around 10% fat. So that's there are fats, but it's very low. So let's see how this plays out in real life. So this is Okinawa. Okinawa, Japan is an island off of Japan. And the people of Okinawa are one of the blue zones of health and longevity. They have some of the highest, healthiest centenarians who are not on diabetic pills or Viagra or anything like that. And as you can see, these people are eating a starchy diet. And I would call this a near vegan eating style, because meat was probably once a month, fish maybe 3 ounces a week, hardly any oil, dairy was so negligible. So it was extremely plant-based and very starchy. And isn't it weird they weren't getting diabetes and obesity? So we're missing something when we just say, I got to avoid the carbs. Some people might argue, well, maybe they have these super genetics that make them tolerate this eating style. But that's changing. You can see not just in Okinawa, but all over Japan, that people are getting sick as their diet changes. People are gaining weight. Maybe not to the extent as is happening in this country of ours, but it's happening. And that study that we're talking about was published in the Annals of the Academy of Sciences. So you see the same thing playing out amongst the Chinese centenarians. Now, I have been deeply moved by the book The China Study by Dr. Campbell. And there he contrasts the health of the Chinese people in the city that are eating more Western and versus the rural Chinese people who are eating kind of like this, even like the Okinawans in Japan, and how they had less cancer, less diabetes, less obesity, etc. And same argument against genetics is that diabetes, obesity are exploding in China as they've changed their eating style away from this type of eating style. And we see this globally. I certainly see this amongst the Indian population. Even the Indian vegetarians they're really on an high oil, high dairy, not a very processed type of eating style, not like the way we used to eat long ago. So the argument of, well, maybe it's an ethnic thing, that argument fails when you look at the Adventist studies, really good studies. Now, the Adventists, 100,000 of them have been studied, and they're a religious group. Many of them are in California. They have an excellent medical school in Loma Linda, California, and they really emphasize diet, and they really push the vegan diet as the healthiest diet. And it was the vegan group amongst them that was the healthiest. Now, they are also known as one of the blue zones of health and longevity. And their diet is very carbohydrate-rich, low-fat, non-processed. So there we go with, and this group is not just Caucasians, there's Latinos, there's African Americans. So I think you can see this pattern all over the world. All right, I find that the Mediterranean diet is really non-specific. Sometimes our mind plays tricks on us, and so we tend to think that all this Greek yogurt and olive oil and feta cheese, that's the way to go. But truly, if we look at the statistics, people of Greece rank 16th in obesity of all the countries in the world, and that was done in 2007. That study or that article. And so current day Greek eating style is probably not what we should replicate. According to the journal Angiology, heart disease increased from 0.7% to 9.5% in just about 3 decades as their diet changed. So what happened? Well, the diet that was reflective of very healthy statistics for Greek people was when they were studied post-World War II. And their diet was 90% plant-based because much of Europe was impoverished back then. So people were more likely eating the poor person's food, like starches and non-processed, rather than having a turkey leg in their hand, as we kind of see the kings of old, overweight with gout in their foot and a turkey leg in their hand. They weren't eating that way. They were eating more like a farmhand, very plant-based. And that's according to the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. So I know Uganda is only one country in Africa, but you see these patterns throughout Africa. So decades ago, a very famous physician, we all know, we studied about him in pathology, Dr. Dennis Burkitt. He discovered Burkitt's lymphoma, but he was very interested in diet. And he was a British physician who was stationed in Uganda. And he couldn't believe how he never saw gallbladder disease. There was hardly ever any heart disease. These weird gastrointestinal things that he saw in Britain just weren't there in Uganda. And again, the British people were eating grass-fed, organic, everything back then because that's all they had. And in spite of that, they were having these Western diseases. So he wanted to know what the people of Uganda ate. And he was surprised to know it was very plant-based. The ratios were similar to the Okinawans. They ate a lot of rice and amaranth and a potato-like tuber called cassava. They were thin and doing pretty well. So those are some of his publications. And he recommended about 70 to 90 grams of fiber. And so the plate that we saw with the piece of meat and then 75% like the salad, that's hardly any fiber. So Americans probably get 11 grams of fiber on average. So I don't think we need to go into too much detail according to the CDC and some of these other publications. The health of African Americans in this country is poor. It's the high rates of hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and autoimmune. So these plant-based, carbohydrate-rich, low-fat diets, and low-fat, I mean about 10%. The National Academy of Science is very pro for them, and the American Diabetic Association actually really does recommend a high non-processed carbohydrate intake, and they cite Dr. Neil Bernard's study. And this is an NIH-based study, and he basically put people on this low-fat, starchy, vegan diet, and their diabetes got better, and other cardiovascular parameters. So isn't that funny that not avoiding the carbs and somehow lowering the fats improve their health? When I get confused, again, all of that information, all that stuff on TV, I go back to these questions. What did these large populations of people eat that were healthy? How did they change when they changed their diet? And what is the most eco-friendly way of eating? Okay, so there's a lot of attention on the paleo diet. And I think it's better than the standard American diet. But long term, it's not good. So the paleo diet, they don't recommend milk, but they do emphasize animal products. And they don't believe in junk food. That's great, but they are against legumes. And it's funny because all 5 blue zones they heavily ate lentils and beans. And so let's just look at population studies for starters, just to see how it plays out. Because I really don't, it's nice to look at little studies and everything, but I want to know how it plays out in the real world. So the Inuits are the natives of the Arctic Circle. And their life expectancy, according to these publications, was 45. And the Maasai, again, eating very high animal product diet, as well as the Inuits, their life expectancy also was around 45. So not very good. And, the American Heart Association, has reflected on this topic of high protein, low carb, high animal protein. And, while cholesterol might be able to go down and people might lose weight through starvation ketosis, long term it is associated with higher risks of heart disease and other and higher rate of mortality. And we see that in the Nurses' Health Study. This is published in the Annals of Internal Medicine. 100,000 people were studied, and they concluded that their hazard ratio when on a high animal product diet was high. And you see the same thing with this Swedish study regarding cardiovascular disease. And this was published in the British Medical Journal. And it is a myth to think that there's this one Paleolithic diet. You know, and certainly they were eating, there's evidence of Paleolithic or hunter-gatherers eating grains. Archaeologically, they found that even way up in northern Europe. And they were more like gatherer-hunters. So, okay, so the other battle is about saturated fat and butter. There's a meta-analysis that was recently published, and this could be a talk in and of itself. So I'm going to just direct you to the rebuttal to this argument that saturated fat is not bad. And the rebuttal is by Walter Willett, MD, the chair of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard School of Public Health. So I highly recommend you just read through that, because there was huge omissions of important studies that were done that helped conclude the opposite. And we've seen similar tactics with the tobacco industry. It almost has a flavor of the underdog, you know, as if the tobacco industry didn't have a big lobbying group. It fights for your right to smoke. You know, 4 out of 5 doctors recommend this type of cigarettes. It's playing out. I just get the feel that the little, you know, dairy and meat are trying to give themselves the impression that they're the underdogs. They're being bullied, when again they're one of the most powerful organizations that influence government today. This to me was a very disappointing study, and it was comparing a high animal product diet to a high carb, low fat diet. But the low fat group that they were studying was 30% fat on average, and that's not low fat, that's high fat. You will never see a study where a high animal product diet compares themselves to a legitimate control group. So it'll be like dairy versus Diet Coke, or there will, be, you'll never see them compared to a Dr. Dean Ornish diet, or, a Dr. Esselstyn diet, a really non-processed low-fat diet, because then the numbers would definitely show the truth that these other diets work. The other thing is you'll never see these high animal product, low, high protein, low carb diets look at long-term endpoints. And by that I mean they just look at triglyceride levels and insulin, or they'll look at weight for like 3 months. But as far as studying, like scanning the heart or imaging the heart for plaques, which you see in the plant-based studies, where they have beautiful endpoints and their control groups are really well controlled. So it's important to look at the details. So Food Politics is an interesting book, and definitely there is food politics. In the 1970s, the McGovern report, based on a lot of scientific data, recommended that people eat far less meat, dairy, poultry, etc. But that recommendation was forced to change because of the big lobbying groups, and instead of saying eat less meat, they changed it to eat more lean meat, which, one is a scientific recommendation and one is food politics. That's really steered people in the wrong direction. And we see this same food politics battle going on today. The USDA has recommended 4 vegetarian eating style that can be healthy. Saturated fat is not good according to the new recommendations. They remove the whole lean meat as a favored food. And they also talk about eat for your environment. But you bet you that the industries are going to fight this one. And they have already started. So we'll see how much is carved out, how much scientific recommendation is carved out, and how much food politics goes in that misguides people. So, for me, I recommend plant-based diets, and that can be a flexitarian diet. It can be, 90% eating plant-based and maybe 10% cheating or whatever. It really depends on the person, the culture, and who they are. and what their metabolism is. But this is an example of a vegan plate that has shown to be quite healthy for many people, and who is okay with this. Not just okay, but really lauds it. Well, the American Academy of Clinical Nutrition is saying that this type of eating style is good for all age groups, old age, young people, children, lactating moms, pregnant women, you name it. They're also saying Kaiser Permanente is recommending, discouraging meats, dairies, products, eggs, and processed foods. And this is what they're teaching their physicians. Kaiser Permanente is one of the largest managed care organizations in this country. And their nutrition pamphlet is this. And they recommend these websites. And all these websites are free. They are absolutely so informative. And many of them have great recipes. The nutritionfacts.org doesn't have recipes, but it's fabulous. A lot of great information. And they're all plant-based. They're all actually vegan recipes. So it's not a wacky thing to look into, this evidence-based information. So this is from my website. It is an example of how I eat. And of course I eat a lot of Indian food, but it is non-processed. It's very starchy. It is not a deprivation diet. I love it. And a lot of learning curve, but it's fun. So what about the argument of moderation? All I can say is that if there's a fire in my house, I don't want my fireman or woman to practice moderation. So Dean Ornish compared his diet to moderation, and let's see what he found out. He was published in these wonderful journals. But in the 1990s, he took patients with severe cardiovascular heart or disease, and he put one group on his vegan, it was like near vegan diet. It was 10% fat, and he put the other group on the American Heart Association recommendations. Just have a little chicken, remove the skin, have a little bit of fish. That group, the American Heart Association recommendations, the standard care diet, got worse over a year. And this was, they imaged their coronary arteries. Whereas his vegan group, near vegan group, got better. Their heart disease reversed. They felt great. They loved the food, which was, this study was so well done. The food was hand-delivered to these people. So it's quite profound. And he showed these same conclusions regarding prostate cancer. People with prostate cancer who were in the watch and wait group, they were put on this same diet, and their PSAs, their blood tests, improved. Their prostates shrunk. That's pretty incredible. So I love this website. I think it's just an example that this food is not deprivation. If people follow it, they might find some interesting results. And of course, follow it under your healthcare provider's guidance. Because I don't know who you are and what your health issues are, but again, when we get confused and people are telling us carbs are bad, and the media and what we see on TV is saying carbs are bad, I go back to, well, what did the Inuits eat? What did the hunter-gatherers eat? What did modern Paleolithic eating style? What did the studies show? Nurses' Health study of 100,000 people versus these longevity groups, these blue zone groups. And it really answers a lot of questions for me. Low-carb diet is not recommended by the American Dietetic Association for long term. But wait, I was told that potatoes, pastas, grains, peas, beans, corn cause diabetes. That's why I'm eating the eggs and spinach and tuna fish and yogurt and chicken and broccoli. A lot of people get stuck on that, and they're very afraid because it's just been so ingrained. And I think another way of looking at it is that when you marry a carbohydrate to a lot of fat, that's when things become obesogenic and insulin resistance. So, but if you're just eating animal products and really low carb, you can lose weight, that's for sure. But long term, you'll feel more likely constipated and, tired. And and then there's this low carb, or there's this. The last one is the high carb, high fiber eating style. We just have so much data on it that it's hard to conclude otherwise. There's not much money in recommending this diet, and so that's probably why it doesn't get as much media attention. And people certainly like to eat high fat because that's the food of kings and queens. So, you know, even though it's a great diet, it's kind of low on the totem pole still. It's changing, but insulin. So we all know, and this is according to Essentials of Endocrinology and Diabetes, 5th edition, that insulin regulates the metabolism of carbohydrates. That's easy, right? It helps sugar get into the cell. It also helps fat get stored. And we see that, you know, in the office as people's insulin requirements get higher and higher. They gain weight and they feel hungry. Insulin has an anabolic effect. It's not good to have high insulin levels because it's not good for your vessels either. And the third one, though, is insulin is important for protein metabolism. And we hardly get taught this, but it's true. It's important for the amino acids to get into the cell, and they need insulin to do this. So why is this important to know this? Well, this study fascinated me. It is from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And they fed equal calories of beef versus equal calories of pasta. And the insulin levels rose higher in the beef group. So, okay, the sugar didn't rise as high, but the insulin levels did, which is cardiotoxic, which is anabolic, which is obesogenic. They did the same thing with cheese versus white pasta. Same thing happened. Fish versus porridge. The fish group had higher insulin levels. Fascinating. And so that's why these other studies seem to make sense, that people, when they increase the meat, or if they go low fat, high carbohydrate, you know, they get better, versus if they increase the meat and go high fat, high animal protein, their insulin resistance gets worse. But the threshold, people, you know, when they're caught in the middle and they're eating high fat, high carbohydrate, that's where they're under the illusion that the carbohydrates were the factor that caused everything. So yeah, a bunch of studies to show the role of proteins in insulin resistance, which I won't go into because it could be another talk in and of itself, but if you're interested, here are some of those articles. I would highly recommend looking at this. This article was about the rice diet. Now, the rice diet was a program in Duke University for decades, and I think they got privatized in 2010, but it was headed by Dr. Walter Kempner. And basically, patients with end-stage renal disease, high blood pressure, obesity, heart disease, really sick people, heart failure, their doctors really couldn't help them at all, so they came to this institute, and for several weeks they go on this really high white rice, fruit diet. I mean, extremely low fat, and they get better. So many of them, their renal failure reversed, their CHF improved, just like what Dr. Dean Ornish and even Dr. Esselstyn out at Cleveland Clinic have been showing. So quite dramatic. Nathan Pritikin had another institute. When he died, New England Journal of Medicine did write a small article about him. But again, people came to his institute. They weren't put on such a strict diet. It was vegetarian. It was non-processed, plant-based. And they got better. So many of them would, it was like they were back to normal. So let's look at a potato and see how this kind of works. So this is potato hash browns that I made. Now, I made them without oil, and they turned out crispy, and I seasoned well. They were delicious. But anyways, if one potato is 50 calories. By the way, it will have more protein than a glass of milk, and it will have more vitamin C than an orange. But one potato without the oil, if you make it this way, if you try to eat 2,000 calories, you can't. It's just overwhelmingly huge volume of food. But if you go to your fast food restaurant, have a cheese stick, or you have a tiny little hash brown that was fried, and its nutrients were largely destroyed, well, that's 120 calories. It's easy to eat, 2,000 calories of that. So really, was it the carb, was it the potato that was so bad, or was that the amount of oil that was infused into it caused some havoc, the marriage between the two? So we kind of touched upon how these plant-based, even vegan diets can reverse heart disease, as Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Esselstyn have showed, improve diabetes or reverse it, and that's Dr. Neil Bernard showed that, for example, out at George Washington University. And it can improve weight, improve mood. We see that with the Seventh-day Adventist studies, reverse prostate cancer. Again, that was published in Lancet Oncology a couple years ago. Lower cancer risk. Improve autoimmune disorder. Let's talk about that. So Venus Williams is a tennis player, and she quit the U.S. Open in 2010 because she was afflicted with Sjogren's syndrome, which is a terrible autoimmune syndrome. Her doctors didn't seem to be able to help her. So she decides to go on a vegan diet, and then a couple years later she just pops right back in and she's playing tennis again. So interesting story. I highly recommend you look into that. But in spite of the fact that these diets do not make big money, they don't have some pharmaceutical industry to fund their research or some big lobbying group, there are enough studies to say, wow, diet makes a difference in autoimmune syndromes like rheumatoid arthritis. So this was, these studies were published in the Journal of Toxicology, the Scandinavian Journal of Rheumatology, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, arthritis and rheumatism, you go on and on. But there are different variations. Most of them were like fasting or vegetarian diet or a vegan or a gluten-free vegan diet seem to improve the laboratory parameters, these oxidative stressors, and also symptoms for patients. And I have personally seen patients who go on this type of diet, their asthma goes away. Or their weird autoimmune disease gets better. I'm not saying it's a cure-all for everything, but it is huge. It's a huge thing that we should be emphasizing. So Crohn's disease definitely can get better according to the World Journal of Gastroenterology study, even on a semi-vegetarian diet. This taught me a lot. This is Dr. Bernard, and he's, he heads the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and he was cited by the American Dietetic Association for his research. Foods that fight pain. And it taught me a lot about elimination diets. It taught me that in a lot of circumstances, what one eats 2 to 3 weeks ago can still immunologically affect them today. And, dairy is a heavy hitter for a possible culprit. And, to try, for example, eliminating that food like dairy for 21 days, 100%, even getting rid of casein or whey, and seeing if the patient's symptoms get better. Sometimes these symptoms are caused by gluten and 8 other types of products, but it is worth knowing about these things because they do work in many scenarios. Okay, well, why not the Amish diet? And what I say to that is, again, we got to eat according to our environment, what's feasible for us. I do not milk my own cows, I do not churn my butter, and I do not build my house. Well, wait a minute, my grandfather, my father had TV dinners and smoked a cigar, and he was eating this way, and he's fine. Well, I think epigenetics has a lot to do with this phenomenon. Now, epigenetics, Dr. Randy Jerthel from Duke University took mice, goody mice, and they're mice with genetically engineered to have heart disease and diabetes, and they're obese. And he fed them this methyl-rich diet. It was rich of vegetables. And not only did their offspring's epigenetics look great, and the offspring was healthy and thin, but the offspring's offspring. So is it possible that those TV dinner-eating people were enjoying the epigenetics of more impoverished eating styles, because most people were not eating like kings and queens generations before, post-World War II, post-World War I. They were eating starchy plant-based diet like the Okinawans and the Mediterraneans post-World War II. And is it possible that that's why in the office a lot of times we might see an elderly person, their child, and then their grandchild in the same room. They claim to be eating the same thing. They all go for ice cream and everything. But the elderly person is thin. The next generation is a little bit more overweight. And the third generation is overwhelmingly overweight. And is it possible that these epigenetics are being played with? Interesting article in Time. Okay. Milk. It could be also another topic that you could devote like a couple hours to. I'm going to direct you to this link because there's about 50 peer-reviewed studies, really well-done articles on milk and its association with cancer, and milk and its association with weight and acne and gastrointestinal issues, and on and on and on, and allergies. Really worth reading. Okay, so American Cancer Society has a nice summary about soy. So according to them, and according to much of the data, if you eat soy like a Japanese or a Chinese person, great. You know, the data is pretty good that their breast cancer rates on their traditional diet are really low. And they even studied about 2,000 or 3,000 breast cancer survivors in this country on a diet that had soy, and their breast cancer risks were 33% less. Now, I don't say to my patients you have to eat soy, but if it's an option between choosing milk, even organic milk in your cereal versus soy milk, I mean, one is from a lactating pregnant cow teeming with hormones, and the other is from a bean. And it just doesn't make sense that we should be instilling fear about soy when we should really be saying, hey, cut down on the animal products and the dairy, or get rid of them. I don't favor soy isolates like these soy supplements. I don't think they're good because they're processed, and certainly soy lecithin, which is found in a lot of junk foods, or a whole bunch of genetically modified soys fed to factory farmed animals. So that's where you're eating your soy, in these factory farmed animals. So that is worth reading about in this link. A lot of athletes are doing this. That's Carl Lewis. He's an Olympic gold medalist. He's a vegan. President Clinton is near vegan. So very rarely he'll eat fish. And I think also Al Gore is eating this way. And numerous, I know there's a NASCAR driver who's now eating this way and really loves it. So the list is getting longer. Another important reason why we want to eat plant-based is so that the people who protect us, police officers, military, they look and feel like gladiators, that they should. And interestingly, the gladiators are known as the men of barley and beans. They were vegans by request because they felt they a lot more athletic when they were eating that way. Archaeologically, it was confirmed they were eating this way when they archaeologists excavated their site in Turkey and studied their bones and their hair and strong bones. Funny that they weren't eating all that milk. But the last topic, a huge topic, which unfortunately because of time I had to skim over. Maybe we do have domain over this earth and the animals. However, with that comes being a good steward of the earth. And there is certainly a time and a place for everything. There was a time and a place to be a gatherer-hunter. But that's not our time right now. And according to these articles, we're not really fishing the interest of our ocean, but the principle at this point. And these are the lungs of our earth, the Amazon rainforest. And they are being burned to epic proportion because of this insatiable desire for animal products. Because we've got to feed those animals a lot of grains, and so that's how it's being done, burning our lungs, our Earth's lungs. And our rivers and our lakes and our oceans are giant toilet bowls. I mean, why are the Great Lakes, why do they have these E. coli warnings? I mean, sewage treatment plants, factory farming, all these pollutants go into making our water sources toilet bowls. And so a lot of these statistics, the number one cause for greenhouse gas emissions is our food. It's not discussed very much because of food politics. These organizations are discouraged from talking about this stuff because of financial influences from bigger industries. But the USDA did recommend to eat according to our environment to keep it healthy. We'll see how long that changes based on lobbying groups, but the United States is definitely recommending going plant-based, having vegan eating styles more often than not for the health of the earth. Whether you believe in climate change or not, that's not the argument, but it's a freedom of speech issue. Apparently the employees of Florida Department of Health, Department of Environment Protection could not use the word climate change. So I feel like, freedom of speech is an issue when it comes to this type of eating style. Howard Lyman, I highly recommend you hear his story. He was a cattle rancher, dairy rancher, and morbidly overweight, diagnosed with cancer, and then suddenly He decides to become vegan, loves it, his health improved, he lost weight. And so he's very politically active, and he was sued by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And he won because of freedom of speech. I mean, he was just really saying his truth. It wasn't like he was libeling anybody, he was just saying truth. But since that time, there's a new food disparagement law, and it's in 13 states apparently. And so even if these food industries are criticized based on fact, they can sue you. So what we eat, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, is a vote for our freedom or our lack of freedom. There's droughts everywhere for sure. We definitely see that in California and in other states. But rather than conserve how many showers people take, why not avoid this? These 2 pounds of beef is 14,000 pounds of water it takes to produce. It's a real problem that's not just affecting our health, but generations to come. So it's not a punishment in my view. If you have an open mind, it's about just kind of getting into recipes, arming yourself with information, having that discussion with your healthcare provider, working with them, so that everybody gets educated. And so these are some really good websites. And thank you for listening.